This episode of Between Turns brought to you by Murphy's Law. Murphy's Law, because if it can happen, it will. Hi everybody, this is John, your second favorite host from Between Turns, and I'm here to introduce today's very special, that's not the right word, it's really just an episode we're glad is done and over with. You see, for the past several months, we've been having this conversation about this one particular game that always just seems to go wrong. Every time we even mention the name of the game in passing, not even get deep into the conversation, just mention the game, bad stuff just sort of happens. But we really wanted to be talking about this in a public way, so we've decided to cobble together what little audio has made it through all of the various crashes and catastrophes. And that's what we've presented for you today. We've hopefully spliced it together in a way that, is conversational and makes sense, but even so, you're going to have to tolerate a few minor discrepancies in audio and maybe even some gaps in the conversation as a whole. But we hope that this gives you a really good flavor of a conversation that we've been having often and frequently, desperately, hoping that one of them is going to make it through. So without any further ado, Between Turns is proud to present the Millennium Shorts. Is that Scorpion? Why is there a scorpion in my house?
Let's talk about what we intended to talk about all along. What did you think of Millennium Blades?
Oh, jeez. Oh. We don't have enough time for me to talk about what I thought of Millennium Blades. Oh, that game is just, is...
To back up a little bit on this, the game is presented as the entire CCG, TCG tournament experience in a box. The game does that exactly as far as, just actually playing the game. You have this thing where you get a bunch of random cards, you sort of sort them into what's useful to you and what's not. You identify what you need, what you want to build, and then you go to the store and you buy the appropriate booster packs that have the keys to the deck you're building. And then you take those, you assemble them into a deck, and then you go into that kind of simulated tournament thing, which also does a pretty good job of simulating what playing in a tournament is like, where you have a plan, your deck works a certain way, you sit down, you execute, and if everything is how you expect it to be, you score a bunch of points, aka you win, and everything's hunky-dory. However, within Millennium Blades, your opponent is also doing that same thing, and sometimes, usual times, they are interfering with you because the effects that their deck is firing off have ways that just are probably for their own protection, but they nullify everything you're doing. And that represents a tournament so well, because if you're into the tournament scene, you're reading about the meta, you know what's there, and if you are an okay player, you're just going to kind of net deck and play what everyone else is playing because it works. But if you want to win, you're going to take apart why that deck works and build something counter to it. What Millennium Blades does a good job of is kind of simulating, and this may be, the designer's own experience, but what generally happens in a tournament is what generally happens to people who net deck, where they just kind of like walk in blindly without paying attention to, possible counters and whatnot, and then their deck just stops working in the middle of the tournament from all the people, the people that are really, really good at the game that have managed to turn their decks off. But what I'm getting at is that the game itself does simulate that specific experience incredibly well, as promised. But that's not why I think it's an amazing game. The part that is amazing, is all these peripheral aspects of it that are also in, yes, a metagame way, simulating all of these other issues around tournament games that have nothing to do with the game itself. And that, I think, is just utter brilliance. The throwing money at the store, you're just throwing money at it and then going, ugh. Yeah. And where that becomes kind of genius is that even though the card game, the Millennium Blades game is about simulating the tournament experience, and that everything you do in the game simulates the tournament experience, he has managed to, as you said, find all the peripheral players that aren't playing in the tournament, all the little cottage industries that sprung up around it, all the little, hobby jobs that people have around it. And he has managed to put that also into the game. And when you are learning how to play, they seem kind of secondary goals to make it not so straightforward. But once you've played it 5, 6, 7 times and you start to really get a feel for it, the genius becomes that all of those peripheral goals are actually game-winning strategies if you can become the best at them and pull them off consistently over the whole course of the whole game.
Oh, yeah.
That's what's amazing.
To illustrate it, we've had 2 games, I think, where someone won simply by sitting on their cash.
Right.
And the first time that happened, we were blown away because we didn't even think that we thought it was just bonus points to basically act as a tiebreaker.
Yeah, that's exactly what it was, or what it seemed like when we were learning.
Yeah. And at the end of the game, someone got like 40 points off of their cash, and it basically just nuked the fact that they had sort of scored, in the middle and in the bottom on tournaments and everything.
Yeah.
So it's exactly what you say. Like, none of those things have been pushed to the side, and none of them feel like they're tacked on. The entirety is there, and it's all interwoven the way that it actually is in the community, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, really. It's really.
Oh, no! What I am laughing at over here is that we are sitting here discussing sorting solutions for Millennium Blades when Millennium Blades is there to simulate CCGs. And what is a big part of CCGs? Sorting and storing your cards.
I was thinking about parts of this conversation that we haven't had yet, and that was one of the points. So it's funny that you landed on it too. It took the funny part is it took the expansion landing to really open that up. Because, yeah, I mean, of all the things that Millennium Blades simulates, what the heck do I do with all these cards I'm not using right now? is right there, just like it always is.
I hesitate to give credit to Talton for designing that as part of his super meta commentary on card games. And the reason I don't want to give him credit for that is because if someone was to say, dude, give us an insert, and his response was, well, I'm trying to teach you something about card games by making your life miserable, I would be kind of frustrated by that. But that's CCGs.
Yeah,
and
it absolutely
like I said,
is.
if he was to back up his not doing a good insert or doing the weird size box or whatever, just be like, well, that was part of the commentary. Like I said, I would be like, okay, I get it. However, that's kind of a jerkwad thing to do. But it still is part of the commentary.
Yeah.
I mean, you definitely can't extract it being part of CCGs from it being part of Millennium Blades, because it is.
Yeah, no, the whole production, I mean, everything about Millennium Blades, like there's no point of this where he is coming out and saying, I have created a social commentary about CCGs. So who knows if the impossible storage is part of that, but it almost has to be.
Well, he clearly did a ton of research. I mean, I know in his game designs, he is sort of pursuing not CCGs, but he definitely is pursuing competitive card game style designs. I mean, that seems to be his bread and butter, what he knows and what he does well. But he even said, I think it was actually it was in both of them, even the expansion rulebook, where he talked about, how he did a whole bunch of research trying to figure out what were the parts that made that industry and community especially tick, and extract them out into something that he could ape. So he's obviously doing some research, and there's obviously some intent to it. But like I said, I don't think not including an insert is part of that intent. But if it was, like, he's a genius in like an evil mad scientist kind of way.
Yeah, I'm assuming the insert is happy coincidence. I mean, if you dissect the game, the parts of it that are intentional commentary are clear. Those stacks of money are, it's the most identifiable part of that game. It's the part that makes
it's the best paper money ever made.
Yeah.
First off, because it is in bunches of money that you plop down.
Right.
And you can waggle them around when you go to make a big purchase or when you're trying to buy something off your buddy. And it also pains you because you feel like you're spending $1,000 on a card.
Yeah. And when the store opens between rounds, you find everyone at the table is literally hurling bundles of money at the store. I mean, that stuff is utterly intentional. I mean, aside from being I'm sure from a cost standpoint, it was a lot cheaper to print paper money than anything else. And the fact that that he invented this idea of bundling this money so that it was just fat stacks of cash everywhere. Again, that was just genius marketing / commentary. That was just a masterstroke of delivering that message, that everybody laughs about, because what everybody complains about is that playing competitive card tournament games is just hurling suitcases of money at the wall. I mean, that is exactly what those games are about. And for the first steps into that kind of universe that he's building, to that story he's trying to tell, being these just giant stacks of money sitting in front of the players that they are then just throwing at each other, trying to buy the thing that's going to make them win.
Well, but then he flips the whole thing on its head, because what wins you the game isn't just winning a tournament. What wins you the game is scoring well in all of the arenas of tournament, trades, set building, which, is synonymous actually with making a set and selling it on eBay, and then finally keeping your daggum money.
Yeah, for sure.
That's one of the hilarious things about this, is that he gave us this way to simulate the ridiculousness of the money that we're throwing at essentially single cards. Because when you go buy a booster for a CCG, and mind you, I'm saying this with pretty much zero experience, so you can trust me. But when you go buy a booster, you're doing that to look for the one card you want, right? Or the two cards you want. Like the vast majority of what's in that deck is trash. He's making you throw all this money to get one card.
Either the one card that you want to make your tournament deck work, or the one card in there that is worth a fortune that you could just flip
exactly.
and cash out.
Yeah, exactly.
Like a lottery ticket.
And as simulated either in the aftermarket or in the whole set building thing, right?
Yeah.
But then, after sort of punishing us by rubbing our nose in how much money we've spent on CCGs through this plopping down of these bundles of cash, he then, in the scoring, rewards you for not doing that and keeping your money, which I think is, one, genius, because while you may not have won the tournament, you're actually winning a bit at life if you don't spend all of your money
right.
on this card game, and you keep a little bit back to yourself. Not only is it kind of this like tongue-in-cheek way to prod us even further, right? Because most of us are adults, and we know full well what we're doing and how it's not super constructive to our daily existence. But I think that in a way he's also found a way to in his little simulation give reward to some of the alternative ways that people interact with CCGs. I mean, I know people who know more about Magic, for example, than most of the average players of that game. However, they have never played the game.
Yeah.
All they do is buy cards, study them, look at trends, and flip them. To them, the game of Magic is not a card game you play on the table. It's a speculation game that you're doing with $60 at a time to buy booster boxes or whatever, and then trying to maximize their money. Like that is what Magic is to them. And by having just this one little ad at the end of the rules that, hey, you get, a point for every $4, he's pointing to this whole sector of the CCG community that is people who they're in it, they're part of it, they can talk about it with you all day long, but the reason they're in it isn't to go play tournaments and win, it's because they want to have the most money at the end of the year.
What's happening?
And that's super clever.
You still there, John? I can hear you, but I feel like you and I were sitting across the table. We played our game of Carcassonne or whatever. We just started talking about CCGs. I could tell you till I'm blue in the face, about how the game isn't even about playing the game. The game is about building the deck. And you spend a tremendous amount of time weighing options, substituting things in, trading this and that, and 75% of the time is spent building that deck. It's like drag racing, right? You spend a week tuning your car, and then you go get on the track, and in 7 seconds it's over. And you go home, and you're like, well, I can shave another 0.4 of a second off if I make these mods. And you do that with your collectible card game deck. Like you're going to build your deck, and you're going to bring it over here, and you're going to have an idea of what it's going to do, and it's not going to work. and you're going to realize that the way this played out in your head is not the way it's going to play out in practice. So you're going to pull 4 or 5 cards out, and you're going to bring that same deck, but with 5 new cards in it, and you're going to play again, and you'll lose again. But you'll lose for a different reason, and that thing that slowed you down the first time isn't going to slow you down the second time. And you're going to take it home, and you're going to pull out 4 more cards, and you're going to substitute something else in. And you're going to do that, and you're going to run that same deck like 6 times until it's actually in the neighborhood of doing what you want it to do. And that constant tweaking is where the game is at, and it's where the fun is at, I think, for people who stick with it. I mean, there are people, because there's all sorts, and they're not wrong, that just want to grab a starter deck and play it and throw it back on the shelf. And that's super cool. But those people are getting 1/10 of the game, right? Like, it makes them happy, but they're getting 1/10 of the game. There's so much more. I could say what I just said to you, and it's going to be kind of meaningless until Millennium Blades. And now I can tell you that same story, and you get it.
Yeah.
And it explained it to you, that 2-hour session of playing Millennium Blades has made everything I just said make perfect sense to you.
Yeah.
So I mean, hats off on that design. It is amazing. And really, those bills are crazy. Like the wads of cash. again, the mockery / love letter of just throwing fat stacks of cash, essentially into the trash. And then, going to the tournament, getting the snot kicked out of you, coming home, getting your allowance money and doing it again. I mean,
I made the joke several times during the second session that, that Millennium Blades is 50% role play. I kind of mean it. I mean, you fall into the idea of what you're doing.
Yeah, and those characters too, like those may be just random collection of powers and references to you, not having been in that system. But I can tell you, those characters, there isn't one of those that's just a person. Every one of those people exists in any given tournament, and they are all infuriating. Like, it doesn't matter what game system you're in. Even if you're playing X-Wing, like, it doesn't have to be a card game, but any kind of collectible tournament game, there's a suitcase guy that for no reason at all, but every time he comes to the game store, he has a suitcase with every piece in the game ever made in case someone asks. And he won't let you use it because it's his personal collection, and it's very, very, it's very valuable to him. It's precious. But he wants you to know he has it. And that guy is infuriating, and he is in Millennium Blades. That could be one of the characters you play.
Yeah.
So yeah, so that stuff is all fantastic. And then
it's not that I didn't get involved in CCGs in gaming. It's that I actively stayed away from them. Like, I had plenty of opportunities in my gaming to jump headfirst into a system, to play games, to go to tournaments and all that kind of stuff. But I actively stayed away from it, and the reason I did was because I don't know, the whole culture of playing a game, figuring it out, and then everything changing and having to do that all again, if that was the only thing that occurred, that would be perfectly fine. But when you then tack on to the top of that, and you also have to spend more money, you also have to learn new rules, you also have to forget old rules that you knew because we're now changing them, and like all that kind of stuff, that's where I kind of start falling away and go, well, why wouldn't I just play a new game? That's one of the reasons that I've stayed away from them for so many years. Millennium Blades comes out, and I was excited about the game just as this weird science project. Very similarly to my excitement and fascination with something like 504. You know, like I'm just as an artifact of design, I want to see this thing work. And it comes out, and we play the game. It contained every component of what I had seen on the outside looking in from CCGs. And it was a blast. From everything I'd seen, it looked like it was all there. And I asked the question, why would I ever need to go play a CCG competitively? Like, why would I ever need to do that now? Because I have this experience in a box that I can plop on a table and play at will. And the irony is that after I said that, I got involved in 2 CCGs.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's a testament to how well he captured even the deck building aspect.
Jeff?
Oh. It starts a second track. That is really strange. This was running so well.
One of the great things about Millennium Blades is because it has everything right there and does it all on the table, after playing that game, you know the part of CCGs that you want to interact with. You absolutely know, I do like the deck building part of it. I don't like this part over here. I do like competitive play at a table where I'm having to target someone's deck and break it, but I don't like spend fat wads of cash. This is exactly why I was able to pick up not just one CCG and go, hey, let's see what this is about. I enjoy Millennium Blades, maybe I'll enjoy this. No, this is why I specifically was able to pick up 2, is because by playing Millennium Blades, I realized I really enjoy assembling that little puzzle. That's why I went into, in this case, an older CCG, because I could purchase huge quantities of cards at a penny a card.
Right.
And just have a massive toolbox to sit down and go through and start putting together those decks. And I don't have to deal with some of the other components, for example, like the metagame in the community. Like I don't care. Like, I think it's interesting to know what people are doing, but I loathe going into a competitive space and people looking at what I brought to the table and going, well, clearly you're not serious because you're fielding an Owens instead of a catapult. Like, I that kind of stuff drives me up the wall. By dealing with an older CCG, like, there is no tournament scene for it. So I can interact with this one thing without feeling this pressure that I'm missing out on this part of the community, because right now it doesn't exist. But then for the other CCG that I got into, it is an active and alive one. So it is more emergent. And you're seeing this stuff kind of coming out and the newness. And you're seeing this alive thing that you can kind of tweak. And because of that, it's a game where you have to combat people's decks and you have to sort of break people's decks. And that is really engaging and fun, but it has a lower price point. And it has a tournament scene, but it's not a tournament scene that's going to get you anything other than credential. So I don't feel like I'm missing out by not doing it. And like I said, I can interact with the parts of the CCG process that I now realize I do like, but without having to deal with all the other parts, because now I firmly know that there are some parts that I don't enjoy, and I think that's okay with it. And if I ever do want to go into a situation where I'm dealing with all of that and having to juggle all of it, well, guess what? I have Millennium Blades, and I can do all of that in less than 3 hours.
As far as like, the chasing the CCGs that are 10 years old that you missed the boat on. It's true, you missed the boat. However, that is an amazing way to play a CCG for pennies on the dollar, and you don't have the spending McSpenderson problem, because you can go through one of those racks at Gen Con of games from 5 years ago, like Ophidian 2350 or whatever, Hexatomb and what have you. There's not a who spends the most wins. There's not anything to chase. There's no, honestly, there's barely even any net decking. Like, you really get to feel a game when you play one that's 10 years old, because the internet is supposed to be eternal, but go try and find a Decipher Star Trek deck building site. It's not there, because somebody's not paying for that URL anymore. So you can really actually explore a game really, really well that way.
it's kind of cool because I'm a big fan of being honest to one's personal preference when it comes to gaming, whether it's board gaming, role-playing, wargaming, even video gaming or anything like that. Like, really understand where it is that your time is best spent and enjoy it, own it, and don't let the pressure to kind of jump into something that really doesn't excite you or something that doesn't pay you the same dividends. And so this is a really great way for me to kind of put my finger on these pulses and say, like, what about this really does excite me? Is it there being a real-time, alive community of people around me that I'm getting to have this arms race with? Like, is that the part of it that I really like, in which case I need to always try to have an alive system that I'm in? Or do I really just like the puzzle and the solitary time spent doing the puzzle, in which case there's lots of different ways that you can engage in that, whether it's just with, one buddy, or even if you find a system that has solo variants or is designed to be a solo game or anything like that, that also has this sort of complicated tiered deck building kind of goes with it. I'm excited about it, and I'm thrilled. And like I said, I wouldn't have even entertained this as an option were it not for how much fun we have with that game. Sure, I didn't get every single thing that you got, from being immersed in the culture for years. But gosh darn it, if I didn't understand enough to know that it was a love letter and to appreciate that and to just fall head over heels in love with it. And so that says something just serious about how accessible this game is to people that haven't played CCGs. And that's actually one of the comments that I've kind of been fascinated with online, is that people have been just right out of the gate dismissing the game because they don't have any personal history with CCGs. Well, nor did I. No, let's back up. I did have a personal history of CCGs, and it was actively hating them enough to avoid them for 30-some-odd years. And yet, here I am, and this is honestly one of my favorite games that we're playing right now. It's simply because of how accessible they made all of the best parts of CCGs that you want to experience and enjoy. And I don't mean experience in terms of just like a term we used to talk about playing games. Like, you actually experience, like you get stressed out when you don't get the cards you want, and you get frustrated that you're out of money. I mean, it is experiential, and all of that is there. But at the same time, I still get to be a hipster and laugh at how silly a lot of those things that I thought were silly were for years, because guess what? They actually are silly. And I think that's the cool thing, is that it's not just for hardcore CCG players. It's actually for everyone to come around the concept of CCGs from whatever their point of reference is and still have something that they're going to walk away enjoying. And that is unbelievably cool. I mean, my wife sat down and played this game. She's never played a CCG at all, period, ever. And before we played the game, and even after, for that matter, I had to explain a lot of the parts of CCG just as a culture,
including Jeff flipping the table on her.
Yeah, all that stuff. Like, I had to explain, like, this is why this stuff exists, and it was great because, again, like, she's not only that person who doesn't have a point of reference for a CCG. In a lot of ways, like, she didn't even have the pop culture reference touchstones that a lot of people think the game trades on, and the game still is unbelievably cool. And she still keeps bugging me about when our copy's going to show up, because she's ready to play it again.
That's amazing.
Yeah, and I think that's just, I mean, that is the highest praise that a game can get, is that when even the designer kind of scratches his head and goes, I don't know who's going to want to play this, and then it hits a table and it has universal appeal at that one table. That's pretty amazing. No.
Okay, starting right now.
Go for it.
So we played for the first time in a while with no one new. Like, everybody had played the game a couple times. Everyone was familiar with how everything worked. We had unlocked these multiple paths, like, oh, cash is actually an option. Oh, trading is an option if no one else is paying attention. These things are all legitimate victory conditions if you focus on them and no one else is. So the big thing I found that was missing, though, and this is hilarious because it's in no way a good thing, but it feels right for a collectible card game. Most of our stalls in gameplay, rulebook consulting and everything, the game is super smooth. I mean, it is not complicated. So most of the time when we hit a hiccup, it was a procedural thing. What order do these cards flip in? That's that kind of stuff. Just all procedural stuff is the only thing that really ever interrupted us. Well, in this game that we played a couple days ago where everybody knew what they were doing, everybody had been over the learning curve, and we were going to get into the guts of it, things started breaking. And that shouldn't be, again, it shouldn't be a good thing, but it was an amazing thing because I felt we had stepped out of the tutorial mode and we were getting into the guts of it. And we were combining cards that didn't seem like they should be able to combine, but they were. And we were taking cards from disparate sets and making wacky combos out of them, but those wacky combos created a timing issue. And that last game, it just ground almost to a halt a couple times. It was borderline frustrating trying to get answers. And, in the moment, that was irritating. But stepping away from it, it made me laugh again because what is a CCG without a giant 6-page FAQ about weird card interactions between sets that were released, 3 years apart. So again, it wasn't a great thing, but it was an amazing thing from the aspect of, once again, this game has created an entire CCG universe in a single box. Mm-hmm. And for what it's worth, like that, the stuff that we had problems with, we figured out 95% of it. It wasn't that big a deal, and it won't cause a problem again. So it's not a dig against the game at all. It was just kind of almost in a game that had been playing so smoothly for so long because we were barely connecting the dots. It was fun to see that depth is there. Where you can dig out those combos and you can find these weird, wonky interactions that need a FAQ, essentially. To me, that is a lot of depth. That means these cards are interacting from these sets, that we're finding ways between the lines, which is my favorite kind of game. I mean, that's why I like CCGs in the first place. They kind of thrive on that.
Yeah. That's
why I like games like Twilight Struggle. Because what's on the card and what's in the rule book are not where you win the game. It's finding these weird kind of chain reactions and these weird intersections that put your opponent in traps and put them in positions where, they can't move. And to have that be in this game makes me feel like the longevity is definitely going to be there. Like it's never going to be an autopilot game, which is amazing.
Yeah, as you're talking about it, what I'm thinking about is how much of that type of gameplay is intentional versus a product of the way that CCGs and games like that are designed, in that they basically just flood every possibility of an option on a card and just float it out there. And any idea they can come up with, any combination of statistics they can come up with, they put out there. Eventually, yeah, like these certain combos kind of shake to the top as the good ones, but during that discovery process, there's all sort of interesting little crevices that a player can fall down and find an interesting interaction and try to suss out a way to use it versus something like an abstract that's very, very, very there's only a couple variables in play at any time. And while it can still take a long time to master those variables, especially if you extrapolate that over the whole course of a single game, you're not going to find those same side streets and alleyways. I wonder if that's an intentional part of the design of a CCG, or if that's just one of those happy accidents that makes for a whole genre that can't exist anywhere else.
Oh, I think it's absolutely an accident, but I think it's an accident that was found very early in the process, right? If you look at Magic the Gathering when it came out, the idea of someone having a complete set was just ludicrous to Richard Garfield. That's why there's such wild variability in the power of cards. Like a rare card was actually like 10 times more powerful than a non-rare card. And it wasn't by accident. It's because, well, you're only going to run into one of these every 6 people you play, so it's okay if it's super powerful. That's what makes it cool. Like, that's what, when this was just in its infancy, that's what is going to make you feel like a powerful wizard. When you unleash this rare card you have in the middle of the game and take everybody by surprise. So the whole idea of people having multiples of cards, much less one, was just something that they didn't foresee at all. And when you have that sort of an environment, you're going to have all of these interactions that they didn't foresee either, because they were just writing cards and they were seeing those cards in a vacuum, not seeing those cards combined with other cards. And I think this wasn't a mystery that took 10 years to unlock. I mean, I'm talking probably the first week Magic was out and everybody went crazy and bought it all up. They had found these cracks in the rules, these exploits, and it is the most fun. Like, as someone who's played card games or CCGs for the better part of a decade, it is the most fun to have a crazy combo fire off that just does something ridiculous. I mean, even now, it's hard not to build a deck that loses 10 games in a row just to see it go off on that 11th game and be like, that was awesome. That's what keeps people playing. I mean, that is the fun of a CCG right there. Certainly the tournament scene and honing a deck until it just runs on autopilot, which is what you want, by the way. You want a deck to play itself. That's the best possible outcome in a CCG. But realistically, that's not fun, right? It's probably like bobsledding, right? Like, if you see like a bobsled team, Olympic bobsled team is going to race down the hill with just machine-like precision, but all the guys have their heads in their crotch and they can't see where they're going. I mean, there's no fun in that, right? Versus you and I go jump into a bobsled and tear down there and we're screaming and looking, arms flailing and crashing into walls and, make a terrible run, but I bet we had more fun than those Olympic guys, right? So, and I feel like that's what CCGs do. Knowing that stuff is there in Millennium Blades makes it even stronger to me. For whatever little frustration it was in the moment, it has captured that as well. Crazy interactions and whoa, like what fires off when, what's the order of resolution? These are all things that just made me kind of feel warm and fuzzy inside when I was playing it. So yeah, the game just keeps getting better and better. Oh, we found some more combos, by the way.
Hit me.
So, there's a few mechanics that seemed to reward expert play to a level that they were never going to be usable. Like, their Blue Eyes White Dragon card or their Charizard card that's in there, where you name specific cards and then you bury them out of everyone's tableau. Those seemed pretty unusable for the most part whenever we had them. And even though that's incredibly powerful, it required you to name the card and know who had it and everything. Well, as we've explored more sets, we found a couple that are starting to let you peek at hands. There's cards in some sets that let you fix the top card of the decks. So now I see those cards have become much more powerful. And not just a silly expert card that you're going to throw away every time you see it. That's not really part of anything. I don't know where you want to stick that in. I'm breaking third wall again just to make you earn your keep. But yeah, that was just because I know we had just not podcast wise, but on a personal level, we had talked about the mental bandwidth thing, right? Everybody's declaring their cards as they play them, and then it's my turn to play this card, and I can't remember for the life of me what the name of that card was that burned me last turn. So
it's a whole wad of cards with a whole mess of powers and abilities, and we talked about this after one of our games where you would try to build a deck around discards and making that happen and couldn't really get much traction there. But at the same time, I'm fascinated to see it happen.
I got really close to it. I don't know. Was that with you? I don't think it was with you that I played that. I finally managed to build a deck that was super fighty and not clashing, not the actual player versus player combat, but an active discard deck that did nothing but, everybody discards a card, everybody discards a card, everybody discards a card. And then I had a guy that I could play on like turn 4 that gave me 25 points for every card in my tableau that was flipped if I hadn't scored any points yet. So that shot up like 100 points. And then I had a deck box that let me score any points that I scored a second time. And then I had an action guy that let me copy the effect of any accessory. So I was like attack, just discarding, but scoring 0 points. Like I'm turn 4 or 5 of the tournament and I have 0 points. But then I was able to like clone my deck box and then play the card that let me score a bunch of points and then double that and then, use the other guy to double that. So it was cool. It had a promise that it can be done. Because I was like you, like I saw that it was there, but it didn't feel viable. Like I'm still not positive that it's truly viable to win a tournament that way. But I think there's a little bit of a groupthink there, because if everyone dabbles in that, it becomes a very different tournament. As it was, I was the only one making people discard cards. So it wasn't terribly hard for anyone to stop, because, they had their accessories that, generally speaking, players have 2 accessories. Usually at least one of them blocks an attack. So my attacks were kind of just being blocked by people. But I think if anyone else at the table was attacking at the same time, it would have been a very different tournament. So I'm curious as to how group-thinky the deck building gets, which I'm assuming it will.
I don't know. I'm really thinking about what you just said. It's not even what we're seeing. So I'm wondering how much of what we weren't seeing in terms of, the attacks and the crazy combos that went out from people's boards instead of just on their boards. I'm wondering how much of that is just that in these first handful of games that we've been playing, we've all been so focused on our own tableaus and our own decks and our own little engines. But I wonder if everyone kind of ventures out, if that fundamentally changes the feel of the game and the type of the game and the way those tournaments play out.
Oh, I think it will. And I think that's fine, and that's actually how it should be, because that's how real CCGs run. You're going to have hotspots of, at this store, everybody plays burn decks, and this store over here, everybody plays crazy combos for fun, and then you walk in there with your curve deck and just wreck their face, and they all have a miserable time, right? Because they've all agreed to, like, build slow decks that make these awesome combos because they have fun with it, and you're going to trounce that. And I feel like, again, this game, Millennium Blades is doing all of that. And as we explore, that's coming to the surface more and more and more, that there really is every facet of CCGing is in this game, which is just an amazing accomplishment as a design. John? I have an idea. Let's do this conversation for a 4th time. I will spend 3 months with a deck, because for Netrunner, I don't play in tournaments, we just play within the game group. But that gives me that longer thing where instead of having to do this in 4 weeks like I would for a real tournament, I can tinker around for 3 months because we're just playing casually. But still, I will work on this deck until it's humming, until it works like I want it to work every time. And almost as soon as I get done with it, then I scrap it and I'm doing something new. So it's kind of one of those things that's more about the journey than the destination, I think, which is interesting. I mean, that's probably, what makes it a hobby, or what makes it an appealing thing to spend that kind of time on, as opposed to just copying a net deck that someone else made.
Do you think that that's the defense to the critics that look at something like Millennium Blades and think that the tournament, like the actual card play for the tournament, is too abstracted? I mean, do you think that by kind of refocusing it on the actual building of the tournament, do you think that's the defense that says, hey, this macro view that steps away and abstracts this one component, that somehow is not some sort of an offense, and yet it can still feel authentic?
I think that's exactly what it is. So here's the big overview on Millennium Blades. For me, I felt instantly in love with it, and after playing it however many times we played it, and then after playing it 3 more times or whatever since the expansion came out, to me it's one of the greatest games ever made, right? Like it's just amazing. But I also realize it's amazing to me. If somebody were to come up to me and say, should I buy this? Even though I am head over heels in love with it, I would really ask a few questions before I recommended it, which is not something... Oh, crap. What happened? crash the computer.
Seriously? Oh dear.
One more time. Man, this must suck when you're doing these at home when your mic shits out on you. Oh, that's the worst. So the thing about it is, even though I think Millennium Blades is a brilliant game because of my background, because I came into the hobby from that vector, and I experienced all the things that Millennium Blades is putting on display, I have a hard time recommending it to someone blindly who was like, should I buy this? Because if you don't have that kind of vector into it, I agree with you that the abstraction in the tournament seems out of place and weird. Because if you're not picking up on all the other little aspects that we talked about, all the, just for sheer enjoyment, the social commentary of the throwing money away or hoarding the money or trading for cards just to sell them or playing in tournaments just to profit off of them, and all the things that the game rewards you for doing that aren't actually playing the game, that probably all seems really disconnected if you aren't familiar with the scene. So I'm not sure that someone who isn't submersed in that culture would appreciate the game and enjoy the game for what it is. So that stops me from throwing it out there as, everybody buy this. This is the greatest game ever made. You need to experience this. It'll change your life. Because it's really not that unless you have that experience in your background as a gamer.
I don't know, man. And honestly, like I'm actually recording again just to disagree with you.
Don't tell the Millennium Gremlin.
if you are the Jacques Cousteau of CCGs, right? You have been immersed and you've explored it. Then I was like almost like the lighthouse keeper. Like I was on the edge of it, just watching and warning people about all the things that could kill them out there, right?
Yeah.
I mean, the first time that I played Millennium Blades, I thought it was some of the most fun that I had. I mean, I threw my hands up in the air and was like, this is unbelievably cool. I immediately went out and jumped on the second edition Kickstarter. And then I begged to play it all the time. And then my copy came in, and I love it so much that I've even played it solo and had a blast. I mean, it has gripped me in a real visceral way because of all that it's doing. And I think that by me having the distance from it, while I may not get all the references, I feel like I can appreciate the satire, as we've referred to it in other parallel universes, to what's going on. Like
I don't think 2 episodes ago we talked about Venus as a parallel universe, but I mean, I assume you're world building here, so I'll let it go.
Well, again, world building through a pinhole like Tolkien. But anyway, I'm trying to make my collection seem bigger, Jeff. Anyway, but no, seriously, like I think that distance is what lets me giggle like a maniac sometimes. Like I mean, for the gallerist, being immersed in it was what made me look around and go, oh my gosh, this is a satire, and be amazed by it. But with Millennium Blades, it's obviously a satire. Me having some distance means my feelings don't get hurt when things aren't done perfectly. So the abstraction doesn't annoy me whatsoever because I have that distance. Now, as a follow-on to that, though, if you're Jacques Cousteau, I'm in a lighthouse. I've played the game with people that are essentially like middle America farmers that don't even know what an ocean looks like, right? I've played it with people that literally don't understand what a CCG is, and if you explain it to them, they go, why would people do that? That doesn't make sense. That can't exist. And they have still thought Millennium Blades was unbelievably clever and fun.
Here's a question. Do you think, your enjoyment of Millennium Blades, from day one, do you think that was like fueled or enhanced by playing with us who did have that experience? Like when there was something maybe that if maybe you didn't quite connect with, that we sold you on it as like, oh, that's amazing because it's simulating this aspect that you know nothing about. Do you think that part of it enhanced your experience in kind of unlocking what's great about it?
Not for me personally, because I have been on the edge of it, and so I understood some things. Now, to the other people that I'm talking about that had no point of reference, like I had to explain a couple things. For example, like the meta. That was a really bizarre and foreign concept to them, and it just seemed like a way to get points. Even when I explained it to them, they didn't see it as like a clever inclusion in the game. They just kind of thought it was a mechanic, you know?
Right.
I do think that there are things that you can completely miss out on if you don't have that enough of an understanding to see why it's there.
Mm-hmm.
However, I think the game's just fun, man. Like I genuinely think the game, like the chaos of the deck building is so visceral and exciting and hard. I mean, it's hard to think when all that stuff is going on. I mean, it's a little bit like Galaxy Trucker, right? I mean, like that is the best part of that game.
Yeah, the real time aspect is what makes it work. Like if you weren't on the clock for every minute of that decision making process between what angle am I taking? Am I collecting this turn? Am I shopping this turn? Am I mining for good cards this turn? Am I counter decking? Am I just building my own thing? Should I throw this deck away and start over? The fact that that's all happening in real time with a 15-minute clock, that's what makes it work, honestly.
Oh, it is. But even the tournaments, I mean, yes, they're not phenomenal, examples of complicated game design, right? I mean, it essentially is play a card, do an effect, play a card, do an effect, and they come out in order. Like it's really, really, really simple. However, because that is such a small part of the game, and because even within the tournament, there's some really cool stuff that can happen. Like there's some really interesting combos you're going to see. You are encouraged to go in with some reaction ability. If you just take in a straight deck that's just all the cards of one set, you're going to get skunked because you don't have any ability to maneuver. And so, that's a really fun part too. And I don't think you have to understand CCGs, and frankly, you don't even have to get the satire in order for that part to be fun.
So you asked me, like, what started this kind of little discussion line is you asked me if I thought the tournament was too abstracted to matter. And I think, another aspect where this game is sort of built for people with that experience and likely to get a lukewarm response from people that don't have it or don't have anyone to kind of shepherd them through it, is it's certainly not by design that vague wordings and card timings are a problem in some of the cards.
I have a sticky note here.
Yeah.
I'm glad you went there. I'm glad you went there.
It's not clearly that like I'm going to make a game that doesn't work to say something.
Yeah.
But I think it's kind of a testament to how good of a job this game does of representing the genre, that there are ambiguous card wordings and weird timing things that make the game come to a grinding halt while someone puts their hand up and goes, "Judge."
Yeah.
My point is, I'm wondering, again, for us that are versed in this, and we go, well, of course, it's a game made out of 2,000 cards that all break the rules of their own game. Of course there's ambiguities and things that don't work. Whereas someone who has that kind of peripheral, barely there knowledge of this and sits down and plays it, when that stuff happens and that game grinds to a halt, how can they have any other takeaway than this game's a nightmare, it's half play tested, who puts this deck out? You know what I mean? I'm never playing this again. It's a pain in the ass.
Yeah.
I mean, how can that not happen? And that's just whether it's a happy accident or whatever, it honestly just makes me love it more. It doesn't irritate me. It just makes me go, of course, it's a game about CCGs. Of course there's card interactions that are baffling.
I don't think it's a happy accident, but I also certainly don't think that it's a mad scientist thing he included, like the bad insert. I think it's in the fabric of how you design a CCG that's what's going to happen. And he designed a CCG about a CCG, essentially. And so, of course, it's going to occur. But, I mean, to circle back a little bit, like, when you made the comment of it's either love it or ambivalent, there's a pretty good amount of hate out there for Millennium Blades, and it is exactly for the quote-unquote broken card situation. You don't have to spend a lot of time on forums to find someone who just, puts up a scan of 2 cards and goes, "This got played against me. There's nothing you can do about it. I hate this game."
Right.
However, as easy it was to find that thread, it's just as easy to scroll down where 30 people come in and go, here's like 5 ways you can break this. Here's 5 ways you can undo this combo. It's the same thing actually with the interpretations of these cards. Like, the threads are covered with people going, I have no idea how to resolve what this card does with how the rules are written. However, people are still playing the game. I mean, I'm still playing the game. The very first game that we had, and I had no way of knowing that CCGs are annoying. Let's be frank. What we're talking about is how CCGs, the way they're designed, are annoying in that there's no way they can test every card against every card in every situation with every possible vector of understanding and interpretation. Like, you can't do that. So they are inherently annoying because you're going to come up to a situation where you play a card as part of a brilliant combo, and you get that gleam in your eye like, yeah, here's my moment in the spotlight. Everyone's going to start, throwing confetti, and your opponent looks at you and goes, you can't do that.
Right.
And suddenly the wind is out of your sails, you're dead in the water, and now you're in this big fist fight when you should be in the middle of your own ticker tape parade. That is really annoying, and it's just built into what CCGs are. And the thing is, the very first time we played Millennium Blades, that happened. And I had nothing that told me, well, this is where you have to sort of chuckle and go, well, that's part of CCGs. We just figured it out and we got back to the game, and the game was fun. And the game was fun enough in spite of that moment for me to persist.
Yeah.
Every single game that I've played has had that moment, but it's fun enough to persist. And the problem is that people that are throwing their games out the window because there's one broken card combo, it's not that one broken card combo was enough to make the game not fun. It's that to them, the game probably wasn't fun to begin with. And this is the reason why they're getting rid of the game.
Yeah, that's another one of those, again, the vectors of approaching the game is that what you're speaking of right there is kind of a fool me once thing. That's the whole idea, and what you're trying to do in a CCG, TCG tournament is you are trying to surprise everyone with something they didn't see coming. The whole idea, the reason you're building a deck is so that you can ambush everyone in your path so no one's prepared for you. So that's what comes up on those cards that are like that in the game, and why if you appreciate what it's trying to do, that's part of it. You walk into that trap, you get clocked out of the blue by something you never saw coming. The key is next week, does it happen again? And if it happens again, it's your fault because you did not adjust.
Yeah.
And if you're the fact that the Millennium Blades does that within that little tournament game, that you can slap down a card that wipes out the entire table out of the blue. When you can pull that off and it happens, the reward is you win the tournament, you shut everyone else's deck down, and while that's frustrating when it happens and it makes everybody groan when your deck gets turned off in the middle of the tournament, the CCG players, they're going to then spend the following deck building session finding the silver bullets, finding the cards that will either actively block that card or will work around the conditions that are making your deck not work. Whereas someone who isn't in with that, I think, will not come back. As you said, they'll play it, it'll happen, and they're like, I'm selling this game, because they don't understand that what they're supposed to do is in the following tournament actively seek that counter instead of going into the next tournament with the exact same deck, maybe a little bit stronger version of the exact same deck, but still with no counters, and having it be shut down a second time or shut down a third time. The non-CCG player absolutely will get frustrated with that and just be done with the game after one play.
I don't know. I mean, I'm still not a CCG player, and it doesn't frustrate me because I think it comes down not even to excitement, right? It's just a willingness to try something new and a little bit different and kind of see what's there for the sake of what's there. It's the same thing, frankly, with tabletop games, because I wouldn't recommend a tabletop game to many of my hardcore Euro gamer friends, because in order to enjoy a tabletop game, there's it's almost like a suspension of disbelief in terms of rules that you have to be willing to do to enjoy those games and get the most out of them.
Right.
And so I just wouldn't bring up those games to someone who's used to operating in a tight game space, with set rules. But if someone said, hey, I want to try this out, there's a bunch that I would bring to the fore, and I would be happy to throw out and show them if they already showed a level of willingness and excitement to do so. So if someone is at all excited about Millennium Blades, I would recommend it with confidence. I mean, serious confidence, because frankly, if you look at the game for longer than 30 seconds, I think you're going to enjoy it. I think the people that are going to hit the wall that you're talking about and then just be done with it are people that they're probably quitting because they're seeing a frustration that they probably were already expecting, or maybe they just weren't interested to begin with.
Right. I guess what I'm saying, I guess what I am doing is maybe justifying those people that are one and dones in that there are games where people will one and done. Well, I will draw a line in the sand and say, "You, sir, are wrong." and I, even though Millennium Blades is one of my favorite games, and at this point is absolutely on that desert island list of games, I will not draw that line in the sand, because I think the people that actively dislike it, their criticisms are valid for them. I don't think they're flat out valid for all the reasons we talked about, but I do believe that they are valid for them. So I would be careful who I recommended it to when people ask my opinion of it. I would ask that question first, like, are you or have you ever been a Magic the Gathering player? And if the answer is yes for any amount of time, then I would be like, absolutely, you got to play this.
Yeah,
but
no, I understand. I mean, it would be like me in BattleTech, right? If someone said that they weren't interested or whatever, I would just tell them, well, you're wrong, and I feel sorry for you. However, I understand it.
Right. I mean, you're not right. BattleTech is a horrible game, as we've talked about
you're
ad
breaking up.
nauseum.
I can't hear you anymore.
Terrible game. Terrible game.
Hang on, what?
Yeah.
I think your mic's cutting out.
Let me roll 400 more dice.